Scientists are constantly trying to understand more about our world by conducting all manner of experiments. But in the past, they've toyed with incredibly dangerous things they didn't entirely understand that some predicted would have apocalyptic results. From nuclear tests setting our entire atmosphere on fire to man-made black holes that might tear the world apart. Well, it's time to grab your lab coats and science goggles as we take a look at some scary scientific experiments that could have ended the world. Number 1. Starfish Prime. So man has tested nuclear weapons on land, in the sea and underground despite their world-ending potential. Well, at least we haven't been dumb enough to try nuking space, right? Let's rewind to 1962. A few years earlier, America discovered the Earth was encircled by belts of intense radiation held in place by its protective magnetic field. These were named Van Allen belts after their discoverer James Van Allen. They worried scientists because any satellites or astronauts sent up to space would be exposed to this radiation with potentially fatal results. So, they suggested trying to clear them with a healthy dose of nuclear radiation by detonating a nuclear weapon in space. Van Allen himself predicted that the weapon's radiation wouldn't affect the belts in any way, but Van Allen was wrong. Very wrong. On the night of July 8, 1962, Starfish Prime, a 1.4 megaton bomb, 500 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, was launched off the coast of Hawaii. People in the area gathered on rooftops to see if they could spot the event, assuming it would be a brief flicker in the sky. 250 miles above the Pacific Ocean, which is about the height of the International Space Station's orbit, Starfish Prime detonated and the night sky suddenly glowed bright as day for the next 15 minutes. Charged particles from the blast collided with the molecules in Earth's atmosphere and the sky was lit up in rainbow colors that could be seen as far away as New Zealand. When it looked pretty, the blast to the Earth's magnetic field triggered a huge electromagnetic pulse that knocked out radio stations, set off emergency sirens, and caused street lights to black out across Hawaii. On top of that, the ionized radiation from the explosion created a new artificial radiation belt around the Earth. The belt lingered around the Earth for 10 years, knocking out essential communication satellites that passed through it. It was so much worse than anyone predicted. But if the geomagnetic field around the Earth has been permanently damaged, the Earth would have been left with no protection from the deadly radiation of space's countless cosmic rays and solar winds. In a few years, this would have destroyed all life on the planet. These results were so shocking that in 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was put into force, banning the use of nuclear weapons in outer space. Number 2. The Black Hole. In New York, back in 1999, the opening of the brand new Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, or RHIC for short, had the whole world holding its breath. This collider was designed to accelerate a beam of charged particles, the building blocks of all matter on Earth, close to the speed of light, which is around 186,000 miles per second, before smashing them together in a controlled environment. These collisions would create miniature fireballs of super dense matter with temperatures of up to 4 trillion degrees, conditions similar to that of the Big Bang. Obviously, scientists were keen to get this thing going, but then a disturbing revelation took headlines by storm. There was a chance that these collisions could reach such a high density that they would create miniature black holes in the realm of astrophysics. Black holes generate intense gravitational fields that suck in all surrounding matter. Even a black hole the size of an atom would have the mass of Mount Everest, and anything larger than that would be more than capable of tearing up the Earth and consuming it from inside out. The risk, however, was small, so small that less than 10 years later, another even larger collider was built, aptly called the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. At 16.6 miles in circumference, particles would make more than 11,000 laps of the circuit in a fraction of the time it takes to blink before being smashed together, and this came with even more potential dangers. One theory argued that quarks, a kind of elementary particle, would be triggered by the collision. to rearrange and shrink themselves to dense objects called strangelets by contagion, it would affect everything around them, transforming the Earth into a hyperdense sphere just 330 feet across. That's smaller than a football pitch. Number 3. KOLA SUPERDEEP Borehole. Now, we are traveling over to Russia and back to the 1970s. This was a time when the USSR was warring with the USA and both nations were trying to prove which of them was the superior superpower. Both were planning separate efforts to drill as far into the Earth's crust as possible to see what lay beneath. But while American efforts were crippled in 1966 due to the lack of funding, the Soviets plowed on, or more accurately, down. From 1970 to 1994, the Soviets' drill on the Kola Peninsula slowly dug the deepest hole in the world. The attempt consisted of several super deep holes branching off one main column. The deepest, called SG3, was just 9 inches wide and eventually cut a staggering 7.6 miles into the earth. For contrast, this hole is 4,000 feet deeper than the Mariana Trench, that is, the deepest place on earth. While geologists and dirt nerds got very excited, more religious citizens were terrified. They believed the hole would reach into hell, releasing an army of demons or maybe even the devil himself. While they all prayed for protection from the super small demons that could fit through the 9-inch gap, others feared more logical consequences. Some scientists believe that intense drilling at those depths would dislodge so much rock so quickly that it would trigger some unknown seismic forces nobody could control. But it turns out there was nothing to worry about. After reaching the 7.6 mile mark, efforts stalled because of the unexpected 356 degree Fahrenheit heat, which was far hotter than scientists predicted it would be. For comparison, if the world was an apple, the KOLA SUPERDEEP borehole wouldn't even have pierced the skin. In 1995, due to lack of funds, the project was mothballed and, well, the hell was sealed up. Number 4. BIOWEAPON. In 1989, towards the end of the Cold War, a Soviet director named Vladimir Poseshnik contacted the British embassy and surprisingly offered to defect. Assuming that he would be a valuable source of information, the British took him in. But what he eventually revealed terrified them. Vladimir had been the director of the Institute of Ultra-Pure Biological Preparations in Leningrad. It was here he learned that the Soviets were developing weapons that used deadly pathogens, microorganisms that causes viruses and diseases. These bioweapons were being made in a network of secret laboratories and chemical plants across the Soviet Union, which the Western allies knew almost nothing about. With all these resources, they were trying to create new antibiotic and vaccine-resistant strains of highly contagious diseases and viruses that would leave sufferers defenseless. The pathogen Vladimir knew most about was Yersinia pestis, the bacteria responsible for the bubonic plague. Back in the 14th century, it is estimated that a staggering 60% of the European population was wiped out by this plague. Vladimir revealed that they'd already successfully weaponized one variant of this plague and were testing it in warheads that could target anywhere in the world. If what Vladimir had said was true, then the Soviets had planned to wipe out the entire population with the push of a button. Britain's suspicions were only deepened in the 90s when espionage experts found gut-wrenching proof of the facilities Vladimir had detailed. But following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the facilities went dark. What's most terrifying of all though is that it was never revealed just how big this germ warfare effort was or what's happened to it since. Moscow has assured the rest of the world that Russia no longer has a biological weapons program. Number 5. The Trinity Test. On July 16, 1945, the very first nuclear bomb in history was detonated in the New Mexico desert. This was the Trinity Test, a combined effort by American and British scientists to create a weapon of mass destruction so devastating it would deter all current and future enemies. But not every scientist was on board with the idea, like Enrico Fermi. This Nobel Prize winning physicist was the creator of the world's first nuclear reactor. so he had a pretty solid understanding of the risks involved in this test. He and several other physicists raised a slight concern that detonating the 22 kiloton bomb would trigger runaway fusion, a chain reaction that could set all of Earth's atmosphere ablaze. In short, there was a chance that this test would destroy all life on Earth. Fortunately, the hypothesis was completely wrong and the Trinity test went off without a hitch. But when a Nobel Prize winning physicist tells you your experiment might destroy the world and you go ahead with it anyway, that's one hell of a gamble. Even though we didn't go out in a radioactive blaze, humanity still didn't understand just how destructive or dangerous nuclear weaponry really was. More than a decade later, nuclear tests were casually being conducted by armies around the world. But their men on the ground weren't given any kind of protection. Scientists continued to test the limits of their new nuclear toys by detonating them in all manner of scenarios, like here during 1952's Operation Tumble Snapper. The nuke was suspended 300 feet from the ground on a series of cables and detonated. As the plasma ball expanded, the radiating energy superheated and vaporized the cables just ahead of the fireball, giving it those strange-looking spikes at the bottom. Since then, humanity has built more than 13,500 nuclear weapons, though scientists believe it would only require 100 to completely destroy a single society. Number 6. Rice Blast. When it comes to food, the world relies on three main staples: corn, rice and wheat. Together, they make up a huge 51% of the world's calorific intake. Obviously, any disruption to their production causes big problems. But some of the worst came down to blights. These are fungi that makes the plants inedible while releasing thousands of spores that can contaminate an entire area overnight. Specific wheat and rice blights known as Puccinia graminis and Magnapoth gracea exists in a worrying 80 countries and entered the United States in 1996. While many farmers saw this as a curse, the US decided to use it to their advantage. Like the Soviets, America once had a biological weapons program. But while the USSR was focusing on pathogens that hurt people, documents reveal that America was investigating how it could weaponize these crop diseases. If a super contagious fast-spreading variant could be developed and distributed by sprays or bombs, they could devastate an entire country's food supply, and the only issue with this is that it wouldn't stay contained to one target country. Seeing how widespread non-tampered versions of the blights are, it would likely spread to the rest of the world, causing an unstoppable worldwide famine. Nobody knows for sure if the US has ever used or even tested this catastrophic crop disease.